BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Blackbox Ned. Jack the Ripper has been mentioned a lot in the news recently because someone named Russell Edwards has claimed to have solved the Jack the Ripper mystery. 137 years have gone by since Jack the Ripper committed the crime spree in 1888 in Whitechapel, which saw the deaths of 4 women: Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. And Russell Edwards claimed in a book that came out years ago called Naming Jack the Ripper that the Ripper was a man named Aaron Kosminski. And I've discussed him on several recent Ripper Wednesday episodes only because of the amount of traction that this story has gained. And in this episode, I want to look at some things in a different way, because in the episodes that I was talking about, I was responding to the news coverage about how Russell Edwards claims that DNA from a shawl that was owned or used by Catherine Eddowes was linking a suspect named Aaron Kosminski to the Whitechapel murders. But the DNA is very questionable, and I'm going to be very frank. I've talked about this last week. There is no certainty that that really is Jack the Ripper's DNA on the shawl. However, I still think that Aaron Kosminski is a strong suspect. And I've said that before on Black Box Online Radio. And the things that I get accused of are perhaps not sticking to one suspect, or what some people say is, well, it sounds like you're trying to hedge your bets, so if it turns out that it is this suspect, then you win, and if it turns out that it is not the suspect, then you win. But my response is that this is not a contest. There's nothing to bet on. This is not a game. This is simply following the story. And I've said for a very long time that I think that Aaron Kosminski is a strong Jack the Ripper suspect. However, I find that the DNA evidence is very questionable. And it seems like when I'm reading through articles about Russell Edwards and his media firestorm, that it looks like maybe 1 out of every 10 articles is strongly challenging us. 9 out of 10 are just saying, oh yeah, well, there's this DNA breakthrough in the Jack the Ripper case, which is a story from 11 years ago, mind you. And then one of them will be like, wait a second, all of the DNA is questionable. We don't actually know who Jack the Ripper was. We don't know if that's Jack the Ripper's DNA on the shawl. So what I wanted to do with this episode is actually look at the strong points aside from the DNA that would point toward Aaron Kosminski being Jack the Ripper. Number 1, Aaron Kosminski was a 23-year-old Polish barber, hairstylist, someone who would have had a minimal understanding of human anatomy. I shouldn't even say minimal, because people who were barbers were trained in minor elements of surgery, and a lot of people think that Jack the Ripper had anatomical knowledge, because the women who were murdered in the Autumn of Terror weren't only killed, they were also mutilated. Aaron Kosminski also had schizophrenia, and I'm going to go out on a limb and state that I think that the crimes that were committed by Jack the Ripper could very well be that of a schizophrenic. I think there is a possible schizophrenic element in the way that Jack the Ripper committed these crimes, because he is not only attacking women, but he is cutting out their organs, he is mutilating them. And with the case of Mary Kelly, she was mutilated almost beyond recognition, and in many ways, to many people, she might have been mutilated beyond recognition. Of course, she was identified after she was killed by Joseph Barnett. But this is just something that I think is really quite different than a lot of the other Jack the Ripper suspects that have been proposed, because some people will put forward a Jack the Ripper suspect and say that everything was calculated. Jack the Ripper knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to cut out the uterus of a victim. He wanted to cut out the kidney of a victim. He wanted to cut out the heart of a victim. And with someone like Aaron Kosminski, I'm seeing this in a different way. Someone who might have been having schizophrenic episodes that would have been driving him to commit these crimes. It was also reported by places such as Casebook that Aaron Kosminski had a deep hatred of women. So you see somebody who's in Whitechapel in the area with a deep hatred of women, who has schizophrenia, who is just going to be attacking these women in mostly a blindsided blitz attack style way. And now I'm going to go out on a limb. And this is something that some people might not want to hear, but I don't think that they have any credible witness sightings of Jack the Ripper. You can read all about them, about the man who was seen before the murder of Liz Stride, about how George Hutchinson saw a man walking with Mary Kelly, but I don't think those witness sightings are credible. I think the Ripper was just sneaking around, running up to women and attacking them. And he might not have even been saying anything at all. And any of these things about how some man is seen walking with the victim prior to the murder, I don't actually think that those are credible witness sightings of Jack the Ripper. And I say this for the following reason. I think that they are just unreliable because there is this element of the Jack the Ripper crimes which really seems to be about how the Ripper is just targeting women who are in vulnerable places. He's not putting on any ruse. He's not trying to say anything to lure the woman into a dark alley or something like that. Instead, I think Jack the Ripper is waiting in the dark alley and waiting for the woman to walk away from a man, and then he is trying to attack her. But this is something else, though. I think if these witness sightings were much more credible, there would be a much stronger composite sketch of Jack the Ripper. If people actually saw the Ripper's face, then they would be able to provide better descriptions, or they would be able to put this out into some form of composite. And I don't believe that the cane that was discovered 2 or 3 years ago was Jack the Ripper. There was a wood carving that was found that some people thought was a composite sketch of Jack the Ripper, but I do not think that that was the Ripper. Now with Aaron Kosminski, this will be very important because he was 23 years old at the time, born in 1865, and the Whitechapel murders occurred in 1888. And this is something that a lot of people find questionable about Aaron Kosminski's suspect profile. Someone who is 23 is on the younger side of the Jack the Ripper suspects. If you are to read things about suspect profiles, even the one created by John Douglas, you'll see that a lot of people estimate that Jack the Ripper was about 30 years old, late 20s to early 30s. I mean, even if you're going to entertain the witness descriptions, which I don't, but I mean, if you're going to think that those are credible, then Jack the Ripper is estimated to have been in his early 30s to mid 30s. Aaron Kosminski, of course, would have been 23 years old at the time. And there is the very famous illustration of him that I use here on Ripper Wednesday. And I mean, when I look at that person, I don't think that he looks 23. I think he looks considerably older, but that's all beside the point because, as I said, I don't think that the witness descriptions are reliable. I just want to point out that Jack the Ripper suspects are all across the spectrum. They are all up and down. I mean, we have Jack the Ripper suspects in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And the reason why is because, I've already told you, I think that the witness descriptions are unreliable. I don't think that we have enough information, or that if people see somebody walking with one of the victims, whether it's Liz Stride or Mary Kelly, then they just immediately think that that one person is Jack the Ripper. And in fact, I think that those people were the ones who were just talking to the women prior to someone attacking them, prior to Jack the Ripper attacking them. And there are Jack the Ripper suspects who are as young as 20 years old, such as Andrew John Gibson. Then there are suspects who are going to be in their 30s, like Montague John Druitt. Charles Lechmere was 40 years old. Lewis Carroll was in his mid-50s. And their just ranges all across. And I think the reason for this is that the ages are just completely uncertain because we don't have reliable witness sightings of Jack the Ripper. So 23 years old for Aaron Kosminski does not rule him out. And Aaron Kosminski was somebody who had a minimal understanding of English. I remember when I was on the Jack the Ripper YouTube channel, they were telling a story about Aaron Kosminski, about how he had a court date, he had to appear for a hearing, and not only could he talk in English, but he also made a joke that made people laugh, something about how he wasn't able to work on the Sabbath, but he said it in a humorous way. So he's somebody who came from part of Eastern Europe to England in he would have been 16 years old at the time. So let's see, I'm going to try and do some math. 1865 to 2 plus 16 years. See, I don't know any math, so that's 1876, 1881. So he was in 1881, he would have come to England. And there's even one source online that was stating that he may have actually been born in Russia as opposed to Poland, but almost all sources state that Aaron Kosminski was a Polish Jew, and that he is somebody who had some very, very serious mental health issues, and ultimately he sent to Colney Hatch Asylum. Now, one of the biggest reasons that people challenge Aaron Kosminski for being the Jack the Ripper is that they state that Aaron Kosminski had a phobia of bathing. When he went into the asylum, it was reported that he did not like to bathe. It also was reported that he ate breadcrumbs out of the gutter, and there was a pipe where he drank his water, and I'm citing Casebook for all of this once again. However, this is something that people try to say that points toward Aaron Kosminski being just a mentally ill man who was not the Ripper, because they say that, well, there's no way that the women of Whitechapel would even let this guy get anywhere close to them if he had some type of phobia of bathing. And the first point is that, well, this is the Aaron Kosminski of 1891 when he was taken into the asylum, or at the very least 1889 after the Whitechapel murders. But also, I think that the reason why there's this confusion is they're thinking that Jack the Ripper is walking up and talking to the women, and he's luring them to the vulnerable place and saying, oh, hey, come with me, let's walk for a while. And I don't think that that's what happened. Instead, I think that Jack the Ripper was hiding in the gutter. He's waiting in the shadows, and that maybe the woman is walking with a man, and then they part ways for some reason, for some unknown reason. And I don't think that the man that would have been walking with her would ever come forward, because then they would be implicated in the murder, and he might not even recognize her, or he might not even be able to put two and two together. You mean some guy walks away and then the person whom he saw last night was murdered? I mean, all types of things like that are possible, and they happen all the time in the true crime world. So I just don't think that that's a strong point against Aaron Kosminski being Jack the Ripper, that he had a phobia of bathing. Now, I do want to talk about this story that's been going wild in the media, and I mean, the news is still churning out articles and videos about how Jack the Ripper has been identified as Aaron Kosminski because of DNA, and a lot of this started about 4 weeks ago, and at the time of this recording, it is February of 2025, and that would have been January of 2025 when everything just went buck wild. But I even found an article from October of 2024 called Jack the Ripper Identified as Aaron Kosminski After DNA Analysis on Victim's Shawl. And I was like, many of you know that Russell Edwards has been claiming to have made this DNA link for over 10 years. Why is the story getting so much traction now? It's just another part of a mystery. But I was just even surprised that it first started in October, it's been going on for 10 years, but this article is from Cornwall Live, and it is just talking about the exact same stuff that you can read from publications that are putting out things as we speak. Let's look here. This is the face of the world's most notorious serial killer. According to an author who has been delving into the Jack the Ripper case for nearly 30 years, Ripper investigator Russell Edwards utilized cutting-edge facial reconstruction technology to generate a CGI black and white image of how the murderer would have appeared at the time. And they're talking about this image that Russell Edwards has shared, but he said something extremely different when he appeared on the Today Show in Australia. He said that was meant to show Aaron Kosminski when he would have been 16 years old, when he would have arrived in England. And this is another thing, though. People put out these articles to get clicks. People put out these articles just to get readers and viewership, and they're trying to do this stuff purely for profit. And they aren't necessarily paying close attention to all of the fine details. So that's something that I like to do here on Black Box Online Radio, and I fully confess that I am not perfect. I fully confess that I am not even a ripperologist. I don't use that term. So if I say anything that you want to challenge, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. I'm also always open to correction. But Mr. Russell Edwards used DNA evidence from the shawl of one of the victims to prove that Jack the Ripper was in fact Aaron Kosminski, a Jewish immigrant from Poland, who was a prime suspect during the gruesome murders. Now, Aaron Kosminski also has another point in favor of him being Jack the Ripper, and that is that he was thought of as the Ripper by law enforcement, or he was considered as a suspect by law enforcement. And what a lot of people are saying is that, now wait a second, this guy actually seems like a credible suspect. There's a book out there called Jack the Ripper Case Solved, 1891 by J.J. Hainsworth, which talks about how there's something called the MacNaughton Memorandum, which was written by Melville MacNaughton, and that states that there are three credible Jack the Ripper suspects: Montague John Druitt, Aaron Kosminski, and Michael Ostrog. And that book is more like, well, okay, I mean, Montague John Druitt was most likely Jack the Ripper, and Melville MacNaughton inserted Aaron Kosminski in there as a red herring. And I think that that is just a very weird form of thinking. I think it's a very inappropriate form of thinking. What I think is a better form of thinking is just to say, Melville MacNaughton wrote this memorandum. He joins the police force in 1889, but he was privy to all of the information that had been made available. He was able to evaluate the case files and so on. And he listed three suspects in his memorandum: Montague John Druitt, Aaron Kosminski, and Michael Ostrog, also known as Mikael Ostrog. And he was incarcerated in France, by the way, at the time of the murders, from everything that I've read about him. So I don't think that he was a strong Jack the Ripper suspect. I'm quite curious to know why he's in the memo at all. But with somebody like Montague John Druitt, he's definitely in England at the time. But I think a much better way to organize this would be to say three suspects are listed, three suspects are being presented, and you could say that Aaron Kosminski would be the strongest of these suspects, or that three of them have been presented, and the evidence seems to line up more closely with one of them, and that is Aaron Kosminski. I don't think that there's any type of red herring or there's any type of misinformation that was deliberately inserted into the case, or that somebody's trying to deceive people. They're trying to reveal the real Jack the Ripper, and then they're also trying to put out these deceptive clues just so it doesn't look like they're actually naming the Ripper. And I mean, I just don't care for that thought process at all. So three suspects have been listed. Yes, Aaron Kosminski is one of them, and I mean, I think that he is the strongest of those three suspects. Let's go back to this article from Cornwall. Mr. Edwards not only claims to have definitively identified the Ripper, but also the reason why he mutilated his victims in such a manner and how he managed to evade justice. Well, we've talked about a lot of that. I mean, I do think that these types of crimes are consistent with schizophrenic behavior. Someone who believed that he was compelled to do so, or that I was watching this interview on SBSK where it's talking about what is it like to experience a psychotic episode. You know, someone who is dealing with schizoaffective disorder, not schizophrenia. But what he's saying is just that a psychotic episode is when you just have a mangled mesh of neurological activity. It's a combination of reality, fantasy, and there could be other things like hallucinations, auditory or visual hallucinations, and sometimes they are encouraging or driving you to commit very, very violent and heinous acts, but it all makes sense at the time, where somebody feels like they are just compelled to commit violent acts toward women, partnered with a hatred of women, and that would explain the mutilations. And because Jack the Ripper was very clearly not trying to murder the women as his prime target, he was trying to disembowel them and to mutilate them extensively. So there appears to be some very strong reason for that. But let's go back here. Jack the Ripper slaughtered and killed at least 5 women in the Whitechapel area of East London over a mere 4-month period from August to November of 1888. 3 victims had internal organs removed, leading to speculation that the killer possessed anatomical or surgical knowledge. And as we've stated, Aaron Kosminski was a barber and hairdresser who would have had a minor understanding of human anatomy. The police actually investigated the savage killings of 11 women, primarily prostitutes, from April of 1888 to February of 1891, known as the Whitechapel murders. It is widely accepted that the 3rd to the 7th of these are known as the canonical murders and definitely committed by the Ripper. Well, not everybody accepts that. A lot of people would actually dispute that. I mean, for example, a lot of people think that the murder of Liz Stride might not have been committed by the Ripper. She was the 3rd victim, and that this is because she was not mutilated extensively. She's also the victim that's found south of Whitechapel Road, and it really is just something that is another part of the mystery. They think that it's purely a coincidence that 2 women were murdered on September 30th of 1888, Liz Stride being the first and Catherine Meadows the second. There are also people that dispute the fact that Mary Kelly was the final victim. They think that she might have been murdered by a Jack the Ripper copycat. And I think that was it in the book Jack the Ripper, The Facts by Paul Begg, where it states that almost everyone is in agreement that there was one person who murdered Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, and Catherine Eddowes, and then the other two cases that I just talked about, the murders of Liz Stride and Mary Kelly, are the ones that are more widely disputed. And as of now, I do think one person committed the canonical five murders, but I'm always open to different interpretations and different possibilities. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly were murdered over a span of 9 weeks from August to November of 1888. The victims had their throats slit post-mortem, including the vagina and body parts removed, from Chapman, Eddowes, and Kelly. So how did Mr. Edwards confirm Aaron Kosminski as Jack the Ripper? P.C. Watkins was the officer who discovered the heavily mutilated body of the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, on September 30th of 1888 on the pavement in Mitre Square. Her head had been nearly severed and her nose had been cut open. She was his second victim that night. A silk shawl had been covered in blood. Almost 120 years later, in 2007, Mr. Edwards, a businessman from North London, found the alleged shawl at an auction in Bury St. Edmunds in Suffolk. Intrigued but skeptical, he purchased it and found it remarkably well preserved, with what appeared to have been blood and even semen stains on the garment. And a lot of people were asking and wondering, how is this shawl able to have been so well preserved over time? Well, I think it just went into storage after the double event, and it was not washed or it was not touched, because what happened is, somebody actually brought it home to his wife because he thought that she would use it for dressmaking, but she didn't want to use it. So then it was just placed in storage, and that's how there are things like blood and semen on it. And it definitely was not washed, and the DNA was not destroyed. It was later established as her body was taken to the morgue. Acting Police Sergeant Amos Simpson took it as a somewhat of a macabre gift for his wife, Jane. Although she never wore it, it remained in the family for generations and was auctioned off by Sergeant Simpson's great-great-nephew, David Melville Hayes. And again, this article is being very skimpy with the details, and it's not stating that like it's just some type of weird gift that he wanted to give her. He thought that she would use the material for dressmaking because she had the ability to do so, but she chose not to. Okay, so Mr. Edwards was surprised that such an ornate silk scarf decorated with flowers would have belonged to Mrs. Eddowes, as she was a poverty-stricken alcoholic. However, the design and the dyes used seemed to be like that of the time, produced in St. Petersburg. This led Mr. Edwards to consider if it had actually been in the possession of Aaron Kosminski, the suspect who hailed from the Russian Empire. And again, like Aaron Kosminski may have been born in present-day Russia, but as we've already stated, he was a Polish Jew. The question arose, could he have left it at the scene? This sparked a series of extensive DNA tests on the assumed blood and semen stains, aided by distant relatives of both the victims, and astonishingly, there was a positive match on the bloodstains to an unnamed descendant of Catherine Eddowes. And, I've never disputed that this was not, in the possession of Catherine Eddowes, or this didn't come into contact with Catherine Eddowes at some point. If Russell Edwards is going to claim that that's her blood on there, that might be a much stronger DNA case than you could say about semen that is found on a shawl from someone who may have been working as a prostitute, because you guys have brought this up multiple times in the comment section. Well, just because it's Aaron Kosminski's semen that's on that shawl, if she is interacting with multiple men every single day or on most days, then wouldn't that just kind of contaminate the results? Or how would you necessarily know that that was definitively his DNA? And we're not talking about a fresh sample. We're talking about something that was preserved in a box for over 100 years, not until 2007 when these things are evaluated. So I just have to point out that this DNA evidence is unreliable, but the suspect profile for Aaron Kosminski is something that I think is a lot stronger. And if you want to challenge me in all of these points, I would love to know what you think. And I do have a previous episode that I've done about Aaron Kosminski on this channel called Jack the Ripper, Suspect Aaron Kosminski. And I wanted to use this week's Ripper Wednesday, just to reorganize it, to try and just list off all of the strong reasons why I think that Aaron Kosminski could have been the Ripper, and the fact that the police are considering him, I do think should be taken into consideration. The fact that he does have certain psychological markers that fit into these activities, I think should also be considered, and that's ultimately where I'm going to leave it for now. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Aaron Kosminski as a Jack the Ripper suspect? If you want to challenge me on anything here, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Do you agree or disagree that they have found Jack the Ripper's DNA on the shawl that was in contact with Catherine Eddowes. That's the best we can say. And I will see you guys on Friday talking about D.B. Cooper. That's all for me. Until next time.